My son sat in the front pew of the chapel, his expensive suit immaculate, his confidence shining like polished glass. He was certain that I would walk away with nothing. He had spent the past decade telling anyone who would listen that his mother built her fortune in spite of me, not with me. As the lawyer prepared to read her will, Brandon's smug smile was the only thing in the room that didn't tremble. But hours earlier, when the phone first rang in my quiet kitchen, I had no idea that my entire life was about to turn inside out. It was raining that morning in Petoskey, Michigan, the kind of soft, steady rain that turned the edges of the bay into mist. I was kneeling on the floor, trying to fix a leak under the sink that wouldn't stop hissing. My knees ached, my coffee had gone cold, and my neighbor's dog was barking through the wall. Just another day for a retired line worker, with too much time and not enough purpose. The phone rang again. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something about the persistence made me reach for it. "Calvin Hart speaking," I said, wiping my hands on an old towel. "Mr. Hart," a woman's voice replied, smooth and professional. "My name is Mara Kincaid, from Kincaid and Rowan, attorneys at law in Harbor Springs. I'm calling regarding Mrs. Lila Carver." The name hit like a hammer to the ribs. Lila, my ex-wife. I hadn't heard her full name spoken to me in nearly 15 years. What about her? There was a pause, the kind that tells you the next words are going to bruise. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Hart. Mrs. Carver passed away last Monday evening after a sudden cardiac event. The funeral will be held this Friday at 2 p.m. at St. Mary's by the Lake. You're listed as a beneficiary in her will. We'd appreciate your presence for both the service and the reading afterward." The wrench in my hand clattered into the sink. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the rain. "You must be mistaken," I managed to say. "We divorced in 2010. "Yes, sir," she said softly. "I understand. But your name appears multiple times in her estate documents. It's important that you attend." I nodded instinctively, though she couldn't see me. "I'll be there." After hanging up, I sat at the table for a long while. The same table where I used to eat breakfast with Lila before her business took off, and her hours stretched into infinity. The apartment was small, clean, but lonely. I looked at the rain sliding down the window pane and thought about the last time I'd seen her 15 years ago, standing in the doorway of the home we'd built together, saying goodbye with dry eyes. The days before the funeral passed like fog. I tried to keep busy, cleaned the truck, pressed my only good suit, even trimmed my beard. But underneath every small task was the gnawing question: why would she name me in her will after all this time? Friday came cold and gray. I parked my aging Ford pickup between a row of black SUVs and shiny sedans outside St. Mary's. The chapel was a white stone building overlooking Lake Michigan, surrounded by bare trees and the soft hiss of waves. Inside, it was packed with people in expensive coats, the business elite of northern Michigan. I recognized some faces from old photographs of company galas, but most were strangers. I chose a seat near the back. The air smelled faintly of lilies and rain-soaked wool. Conversations floated around me like static murmurs about stock prices. Condolences whispered between colleagues. My ex-wife's empire, White Pine Advisory Group, had turned into one of the most powerful consulting firms in the state. She'd built it with relentless precision, while I had kept my world small and simple. Then I heard a familiar voice, sharper now, more controlled. "You shouldn't be here." I looked up. Brandon stood in the aisle, expression frozen in a practiced mask of politeness. He looked so much like her, it hurt. The same sharp jaw, the same cool gray eyes. But where Lila had once held warmth, Brandon's gaze carried nothing but contempt. "I came to pay my respects," I said quietly. He leaned closer. "You lost that right a long time ago, Dad. This is her day, not yours." People turned to look. I could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. "I won't cause a scene," I said. "I'll stay in the back." Brandon straightened, his voice rising just enough for the crowd to hear. "You embarrassed her when she was alive. Don't ruin her funeral too." Whispers rippled through the pews. A woman in pearls shook her head. I felt a flush creeping up my neck, but I refused to move. I'd spent too many years being pushed out of moments that mattered. I wasn't leaving this one. When the service began, I focused on the sound of the organ, the cadence of the prayers. But all I could think of was how Lila had once hummed hymns under her breath, while driving a habit she probably trained herself out of as her world grew more corporate. The eulogies painted her as a visionary, a leader, a self-made icon. No one mentioned her laugh, or how she used to steal fries off my plate, or how she cried the night our son was born. Success had rewritten her into marble. When it was over, people rose in a synchronized rustle of expensive fabric. I stayed seated until most had left, then stood, ready to disappear quietly. "Mr. Hart?" The voice came from the side aisle. A woman in a tailored gray suit approached Mara Kincaid, the attorney who'd called me. Her calm professionalism carried a current of curiosity. "Would you mind joining us at the firm's office for the reading?" she asked. "It will only take an hour." Before I could answer, Brandon stepped between us. "That won't be necessary. Whatever she left him can be mailed." Mara's eyes hardened. "That's not how estate law works, Mr. Hart. Your mother specifically requested both of you be present." The air between us tightened. Brandon's jaw flexed. "Fine," he said at last. "But let's make it quick." As they walked toward the doors, I caught my reflection in the stained glass window. Older, smaller, but still standing. I didn't know what awaited me downtown, only that for the first time in years, my name had been spoken in connection with hers. And that, somehow, felt like the beginning of something neither of us had finished. I still remember the first night I saw Lila Carver. It was February 1989, and Michigan's winter had laid its heavy hand across the north. Snow piled up in drifts along the main street, muffling everything but the wind. I'd just finished a 12-hour shift repairing downed lines after an ice storm, hands still numb despite the heat blasting in my truck. All I wanted was coffee and something warm that wasn't from a vending machine. That's how I ended up at Rourke's Diner, a squat little building glowing orange through the snow. I was halfway through my slice of cherry pie when I heard her voice, sharp, confident, impossible to ignore. "You're telling me you don't hire women because they can't handle the hours?" she said, standing at the counter, her red scarf slipping loose from her coat. The manager, a round man with a coffee pot in one hand, stammered, "Ma'am, I'm not saying—" "Yes, you are. You're saying stamina belongs to men and patience belongs to women." "That's nonsense, Mr. Rourke." I'd never seen anyone like her. She had the look of someone who belonged in a courtroom, not a diner, dark hair, steady eyes, a presence that bent the room around her. When she finally noticed me watching, I smiled and said the first thing that came to mind, "You should run for office." Her lips curved slightly. "You vote?" "Every time." That made her laugh. The sound was rich and unguarded, and it hit something deep inside me. She ordered coffee, came to sit at the counter beside me, and before I knew it, we were talking about bad roads, good books, and the way the lake froze like glass every winter. She told me she worked for a small logistics firm, trying to get a promotion she probably deserved more than her boss. I told her I was a line worker for Northern Power, just a man with calloused hands and no patience for pretension. When I asked her name, she said it with quiet pride, Lila Carver. I didn't know it then, but that name would echo through the rest of my life. We were married a year later, in a tiny church near Traverse City. Lila wore a borrowed dress and snow boots hidden under the hem. I had $1,200 in savings and a heart full of plans. We rented a small carriage house on the edge of town, its roof sagging a little, but its kitchen bright with morning light. She cooked with the same determination she worked with. Everything was measured, precise, a recipe for success. For the first few years, life was good, simple, hardworking, and full of warmth. We fixed the house together, painted the walls, hosted neighbors for potlucks. I'd come home covered in grit, and she'd still greet me with a smile that made the day's wait disappear. Then, little by little, the rhythm changed. It started when she took night classes in business management. "Just to sharpen my skills," she said. But soon the textbooks covered our kitchen table, and dinner conversations turned into market analyses. She built a small side venture consulting for local manufacturers. At first, I was proud my wife, the smartest person I'd ever met, making her mark. But success came fast. And success, I learned, is a demanding companion. She started getting calls late at night. I'd wake to the glow of her laptop, numbers flickering across her glasses. "Go back to sleep, Cal," she'd whisper, not looking up. By the time our son Brandon was born, her company had taken on a dozen clients. I still remember holding that tiny boy in my arms, thinking life couldn't possibly get better. Lila sat in the hospital bed, exhausted but radiant, already making notes for a project she had to deliver in a week. "You should rest," I said gently. "Rest is for people who can afford to stop," she murmured. "We're building something bigger than ourselves, Cal. I can feel it." At first, I believed her. I wanted to believe that the late nights and canceled weekends were temporary sacrifices for a better future. But as Brandon grew, Lila's world expanded, while mine stayed the same. She hired her first employee when Brandon turned 3. By the time he was 7, she'd rented a downtown office and renamed her firm White Pine Advisory Group. The money started flowing in: new furniture, new cars, dinners with clients. I told myself not to resent it, that she'd earned it. But money changes the air between people. It makes silence heavier. I remember the day she bought Brandon his first computer. He was only 8, his feet barely touching the floor as he stared at the glowing screen. "He needs to understand technology," Lila said, pride shining in her eyes. "The world belongs to kids who can think faster than machines." "What about teaching him to fish?" I asked, half joking. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Fishing won't pay for college." The divide grew sharper after that. She started bringing Brandon to her business lunches. He learned to talk like her, to measure people in potential rather than patience. By 12, he was correcting my grammar and quoting market trends. We argued more. I'd come home to find her on the phone, pacing, talking about expansion and projections. "Can we have one dinner without the company?" I asked one night. "This is the company, Cal," she said. "It's our future." "No," I said quietly. "It's yours." That was the first time she didn't answer. Years slipped by. The house grew larger, but the space between us grew wider. Dinners became quiet. Laughter vanished from the rooms. Brandon's birthdays turned into networking events. I tried to hold on to the woman who once laughed over cherry pie and snowstorms, but I was losing her to something colder than ambition. The breaking point came one autumn evening. Brandon had just turned 15. Lila was on her laptop, drafting another proposal. I asked her if she'd come to his school concert the next night. "I can't," she said without looking up. "I have a meeting." "You said that last time," I said. "He's starting to think you don't care." Her eyes lifted, sharp as glass. "Don't guilt me, Cal. I'm doing this for him." I stood there, feeling like a stranger in my own kitchen. "He doesn't need another deal, Lila. He needs his mom." For the first time, she faltered just a flicker, then looked away. "You'll never understand," she whispered. She was right. I didn't. That winter, she filed for divorce. The lawyers handled everything with surgical precision. She kept the company, the main house, and our son. I got the old pickup, a modest settlement, and an address that didn't matter to anyone but me. When the papers arrived, she had written one sentence in the margin beside her signature. "I hope someday you'll see why I had to do it." It would take me 15 years and one funeral to finally understand. The sky over Petoskey had turned that flat gray that promised more rain, the kind of day where even the gulls seemed reluctant to move. After the funeral, people drifted from the chapel, in murmurs and black umbrellas, their shoes sinking slightly into the wet grass. I stood near the gravel path, waiting for the parking lot to thin out before heading to my truck. That's when Brandon appeared again, his voice as cold as the lake wind. "Don't expect anything," he said, hands in his coat pockets. "Whatever you think Mom left you, it's not out of love. It's out of pity." I turned toward him slowly. His face was dry, untouched by the rain that speckled my shoulders. "I didn't come here expecting anything, Brandon." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Good, because you're not getting a cent." She made sure of that. Before I could respond, he leaned in closer, his words low enough that only I could hear. She used to say you were her one mistake. Now, thanks to you showing up here, everyone will remember that. For a moment, the wind carried the faint scent of lake water and lilies. I could have answered, told him he was wrong. Told him his mother once loved me so much it scared her, but the words wouldn't come. He didn't want truth. He wanted victory. So I let silence be my shield. When I finally turned away, a small slip of paper was tucked under my windshield wiper. I almost tossed it, assuming it was another church flyer or parking notice. But the handwriting stopped me. Neat, deliberate cursive, written with the kind of precision that meant something important. Do not sign anything Brandon brings you. Meet me before the reading. Back staircase, Kincaid, and Rowan. There was no name, only an initial, E. For a moment, I stared at it, the paper already dampening from the drizzle. A trick maybe, or a warning. I couldn't tell. By 4 o'clock, I was standing outside the law office downtown, a tall red brick building with a brass plaque and rain pooling at the steps. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and money. The receptionist directed me to the side corridor. The back staircase waited narrow, dim, lined with old family portraits of men in suits who looked like they hadn't smiled since the Eisenhower administration. Halfway down, a man stepped from the shadows. Late 50s, trim beard, beige trench coat. He looked like someone who'd spent too long keeping other people's secrets. "Mr. Hart," he said softly. "Name's Emery Pike." The name stirred something faint in my memory. "You worked with Lila?" "I was her controller at White Pine Advisory until last year," he said. "Resigned after disagreements about succession." He checked the stairwell door, making sure we were alone. "You don't have much time, so I'll be plain. Lila didn't trust Brandon's circle, especially Devlin Rowe, her CFO. She believed they were positioning to take the company after her death." I frowned. "How? She owned the majority, didn't she?" Emery nodded. 65%, but control can be stolen in quieter ways. Board manipulation, proxy voting. They'd been pushing her to consolidate her assets, claiming it was for tax efficiency. She refused. And 3 months ago, she created a separate trust, something off the books. It's called the Good Heart Trust. That name made me blink. Good Heart was a tiny township north of Harbor Springs, nothing there but trees, winding roads, and the lake. "What does it do?" I asked. Emery's eyes darted toward the window, as though expecting someone to be listening. "It triggers if anyone attempts to coerce, forge, or prematurely execute changes to her estate. I don't know the details, she kept them sealed, but I know it ties to a property deed and an escrow account. She told me once, if the wolves come for my son, I want someone left who can still tell teeth from kindness." The words sent a chill through me. "And that someone is me?" He gave a faint smile. "That's my guess." A sound echoed from above the elevator. Ding. Emery stiffened. "I shouldn't be seen talking to you. If Devlin knows I warned you, he'll make my life miserable." "Then why risk it?" I asked. "Because Lila was many things, Mr. Hart, but she wasn't cruel. She regretted how things ended between you. Said once you were the only person who told her the truth, when everyone else was trying to use her." He started up the stairs, then paused. "When the reading begins, pay attention to what isn't read aloud." She hid something in plain sight. Before I could ask more, he was gone. A door creaked open somewhere above, followed by the soft thud of rain on the roof. I glanced at the note again, ink beginning to bleed, and slipped it into my pocket. When I entered the main office, Brandon was already there, standing by the window like a man about to deliver a victory speech. His reflection glowed faintly against the storm outside. "You're late," he said without turning around. "I was early," I replied. "Just took the stairs." He finally looked at me, his expression carefully arranged. The kind of composure that only came from knowing you'd already won. "Let's not make this difficult, Dad. Mom left me the company, obviously. You'll probably get something symbolic, a painting, maybe a check to keep you quiet. So just nod, sign, and don't embarrass yourself." Mara Kincaid entered then, calm and composed as ever. Mr. Hart, Mr. Hart, she said, her tone acknowledging the tension without indulging it. Thank you for coming. The reading will be in my office. As we followed her down the corridor, Brandon leaned close enough for me to hear his whisper. After today, we'll finally close the book on this. You'll be out of her story for good. I didn't answer. Instead, I felt for the folded note in my pocket, the paper warm from my hand. The law office was elegant dark wood, tall windows, rows of books that probably hadn't been opened in years. A decanter of amber whiskey sat untouched on a sideboard. Mara gestured for us to sit. Brandon took the chair closest to her desk. I took the one farther away, by the window where the rain streaked down the glass in silver lines. Before we begin, Mara said, clasping her hands, I need to remind you both that Mrs. Carver's final will and testament was executed in March of last year. It supersedes all prior versions. She was of sound mind, under no coercion, and the execution was witnessed on video. Brandon nodded impatiently. We understand. Mara glanced at me. Do you? I do, I said quietly. I just didn't know I was still in her story. She studied me for a moment, something like sympathy flickering behind her professional poise. Then she opened a thick folder, sealed with a blue ribbon, and began to read. As her voice filled the room, I couldn't help but glance toward the rain-blurred street below. A dark SUV idled at the curb, its headlights dimmed, its engine humming like a warning I couldn't yet understand. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the strange certainty that this was not just a will reading. It was the opening act of something much larger, something Lila had set in motion long before her heart stopped beating. The rain had not let up outside. It tapped rhythmically against the tall windows as if keeping time with Mara Kincaid's deliberate voice. The room smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish, the scent of places where life-changing news was delivered with calm precision. Brandon sat poised at the edge of his seat, chin lifted, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. I recognized that smile. It was the same one he'd worn when he used to beat me at chess as a teenager and then explain how I'd missed the obvious move. He wasn't waiting to hear a will, he was waiting to watch me lose. Mara adjusted her glasses, her tone professional, detached. This is the last will and testament of Mrs. Lila Carver, executed on March 14th of last year. All prior versions and codicils are hereby revoked. Her eyes flicked toward us both before she continued. Mrs. Carver expressed her wish that her estate be divided according to the following provisions, and that her son, Brandon Hart, and her former husband, Mr. Calvin Hart, both be present at the reading to acknowledge her intent. I felt Brandon's head turn slightly at the faintest tilt of disbelief, but he said nothing. Mara began with the obvious. To my beloved son, Brandon Hart, I leave the family home at 228 Harbor View Lane, including all furnishings, artwork, and personal property contained therein. Brandon leaned back slightly, his smile sharpening. As expected, he murmured. Mara continued, additionally, I bequeath to my son the amount of $500,000 to be transferred from my liquidity account within 60 days of probate. Brandon's grin widened. I could almost hear his mental calculation house, artwork, cash a foundation of wealth he assumed would only expand as the reading went on. He straightened in his seat, crossing one leg, casually, over the other. And, Mara added, pausing long enough to shift her papers, I hereby designate my son as the continuing executive liaison to White Pine Advisory Group, subject to the conditions outlined in Section 4. That word, conditions, sliced through the air like a paper cut. Brandon frowned. Conditions? Mara adjusted her glasses again, voice steady. Yes. Section 4 states that your inheritance is contingent upon your continued employment with White Pine Advisory Group for no fewer than 2 consecutive fiscal years following the execution of this will, or until such time as the company is sold or dissolved. What? Brandon's voice rose slightly. That doesn't make sense. I'm already an executive. What kind of condition is that? It is standard language when a grantor wishes to ensure continuity of stewardship, Mara replied. There is also an additional clause. Any attempt to challenge or interfere with the administration of the estate, or to remove corporate officers without due process, shall result in immediate forfeiture of your inheritance. Brandon blinked, his jaw tightening. She didn't mean that literally. My mother would never put restrictions on her own son. Mara's gaze was cool and unwavering. She reviewed every word of this document herself. It was her choice to include that clause. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft patter of rain. Brandon shifted in his chair, struggling to maintain the air of control that had begun to slip away. "Fine," he said finally, his tone brittle. "Fine. If that's what she wanted, then I'll honor it." I said nothing, but I felt an uneasy weight growing in my chest. I had expected her will to be neat, predictable, the empire passing smoothly from mother to son. But this language, the careful phrasing, the restrictions, it felt like something else entirely. Like a test. Mara continued reading through minor details: jewelry to a cousin, charitable donations, and the establishment of a small scholarship fund in Lila's name. Brandon's impatience grew with each paragraph. He started tapping his finger on the table, small, rhythmic bursts that betrayed how badly he wanted to reach the part he considered the real money. At last, Mara turned to a new page, her tone shifting ever so slightly. "That concludes the specific bequests to Brandon Hart." The tapping stopped. Brandon's brow furrowed. "Excuse me? That's it?" Mara looked up. "Those are the total direct provisions made in your name, yes." He let out a sharp laugh that sounded more like disbelief than amusement. "You're telling me she left the house and $500,000 and that's it? The company, the assets, the holdings, where do those go?" Mara placed the first set of documents neatly aside and opened another folder sealed with a gold clip. "Those items fall under the disposition of the remainder of the estate," she said, her tone soft but deliberate. The rain outside intensified, streaking the window with silver lines. Something in her voice made the room feel smaller. Brandon leaned forward, his confidence faltering just a little. "The remainder," he repeated, as though the word itself might bend to his will. Mara nodded. "Yes. The remainder includes all controlling shares of White Pine Advisory Group, associated subsidiaries, investment portfolios, and liquid assets held in Mrs. Carver's primary accounts." He smiled again, relief washing over his face. "There we go," he said under his breath. "Now we're getting somewhere." But Mara didn't smile back. She set the documents down gently, folding her hands. "Before I continue, both of you should understand that what comes next reflects Mrs. Carver's final and deliberate decision. She confirmed it twice with our firm and requested that it be read verbatim." Brandon sat straighter, the confidence returning to his shoulders. He glanced at me, almost mockingly. "Guess this is where you get your watch collection, huh, Dad?" I didn't answer. Something in Mara's careful tone made me wary. It reminded me of the moments just before a thunderstorm breaks, that charged, uneasy silence when even the air holds its breath. Mara's gaze flicked between us, then back to the will. "The remainder of Mrs. Carver's estate shall be distributed as follows." Brandon's smile froze in place, as if he already sensed that the next line would not belong to him. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the lake. Inside, the air stilled, waiting for words that would tear the balance of our lives in half. Mara's voice did not rise or fall when she said it. She spoke with the same calm precision she had used from the start, but the sentence that left her lips split the air like lightning. "To my former husband, Calvin Hart," she read, "I bequeath controlling interest in White Pine Advisory Group and its subsidiary holdings, together with $33.5 million, to be transferred from my primary investment accounts within 60 days of probate. In addition, he is to be appointed chairman of the board of directors, vested with all voting rights associated with this ownership." The words hung in the room. For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain slapping the glass and the low hum of the office lights. I thought I'd misheard her. Maybe she had read a draft from an older document, one from before the divorce. I waited for her to correct herself, but she didn't. She simply turned to the next page, pen poised, as if the sentence she had just spoken were a simple fact of law, not a bomb detonating in the middle of my life. Brandon's chair scraped violently against the floor. "Excuse me?" His voice cracked. "That can't be right." Mara looked up, composed but firm. "It is correct, Mr. Hart. These are your mother's signed and notarized directives. I've verified the document myself." Brandon laughed, a short, panicked sound. "You're telling me she left him the company? And $33 million? My father? The man who barely paid rent on time?" I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. My hands felt numb against the chair's wooden arms. "I think there must be some mistake," I said, hearing how small my voice sounded. "We hadn't spoken in 15 years. Mara shook her head gently. "There's no mistake, Mr. Hart. Your ex-wife reviewed this will twice in the months before her passing. She insisted on each word." Brandon slammed his hand against the desk, rattling the glass of water beside Mara's papers. No, that's impossible. He must have gotten to her. You're telling me she'd hand everything she built to the man who—" "She made this decision of her own free will," Mara said firmly. "I was present during every discussion, as were 2 witnesses and a medical examiner, who verified her mental clarity." Brandon turned on me, face flushed red with rage. "What did you do, Dad? Did you manipulate her? Call her when she was sick? Feed her some guilt trip about the past?" I shook my head. "I didn't. I didn't even know she was ill." "She wasn't ill," Mara said, flipping to another page. "Mrs. Carver was in excellent health when this will was executed. In fact, she was planning an expansion of the firm into international markets." Brandon's face twisted. "Then why? Why would she do this? Why give control of her company to a man who didn't even understand it?" Mara met his gaze evenly. "Because she wanted to." He laughed again, but the sound was unsteady now. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have," she replied. The rain grew heavier, battering the windows like fingers drumming in anger. I stared at the polished surface of Mara's desk, watching droplets of water trail down the glass behind her. None of it made sense. Lila had spent decades building her empire from the ground up. White Pine was her identity, her monument to ambition. She'd once told me that her company was her real marriage, the one that would never disappoint her. And now, she'd handed it all back to me? It was too much, too strange. Brandon began pacing behind his chair. "You don't understand," he said, half to himself, half to the air. "She wouldn't do this to me. She spent my entire life preparing me to take over. She said I was the future of White Pine." He turned back toward Mara, voice rising again. "Read the rest. Maybe there's another clause. Maybe she meant a joint inheritance." Mara flipped through the remaining pages with measured patience. "There is no joint provision, Mr. Hart. All controlling interest and majority assets are assigned to your father. Your inheritance remains as stated, the Harbor View property and $500,000. He stared at her as if she'd just spoken another language. "This is fraud," he said, pointing at the documents. "You've been tricked." She was manipulated. "Your mother anticipated that reaction," Mara said quietly. "She arranged a competency assessment with an independent psychologist and recorded a video statement verifying her intent. I was present for both." Brandon's jaw trembled. No, she wouldn't. She couldn't." Mara cleared her throat gently. "There is one more item to read," she said. "A personal letter Mrs. Carver requested I share after these provisions were announced." That sentence froze him in place. "A letter?" "Yes," she said, reaching for a sealed manila envelope. "She addressed it to both of you." Brandon's voice dropped, suddenly hoarse. "Read it." Mara hesitated. She requested that it be read only after the initial acknowledgement of inheritance was signed. "I'm not signing anything," Brandon snapped. "Read it now." I spoke for the first time in minutes. Maybe we should hear it. Brandon whipped around. "You don't get to decide anything here." But Mara was already slicing open the envelope with a letter opener. "Given the current emotional circumstances," she said softly, "I think Mrs. Carver would have wanted her words to speak before we proceed further." She unfolded several sheets of cream paper and adjusted her glasses. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, neat, deliberate. Lila's hand. "My dearest Calvin, and my beloved son Brandon," Mara began reading, her voice gentler now. "If you're hearing this, it means I am gone. I hope this letter brings more clarity than confusion, though I know that may be wishful thinking. Brandon's breathing had gone shallow. His hands gripped the armrests so tightly, his knuckles were white. Lila's words continued, steady, rational, but full of something human I hadn't heard from her voice in years. Calvin, I know you never expected anything from me. You stopped expecting a long time ago. But in the years since our divorce, I've come to understand that building a fortune means nothing if you lose the person who kept you honest. You reminded me what decency looked like, even when I didn't want to see it. For that, I owe you more than I can say. The lump in my throat grew so thick, I couldn't swallow. Mara turned the page. Brandon, my brilliant son, you were my pride and my purpose, but you became so focused on inheriting power that you forgot what it was for. I have given your father what I denied him the chance, to show you that leadership isn't about control, it's about conscience. Brandon made a sound, somewhere between a gasp and a growl. No, this is fake. This isn't her. It is, Mara said softly. Every word. The office fell into silence again. The kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound too loud in your ears. When she folded the letter back into its envelope, I realized my hands were trembling. Brandon stood, his face twisted with something far deeper than anger. It was betrayal, grief, disbelief, all knotted together. You think this is over? He said, voice shaking. You think I'll just let this stand? I'll contest it. I'll tear it apart piece by piece. You don't deserve what she built. I rose slowly from my chair, meeting his furious eyes. Maybe not, I said quietly, but she thought I did. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in years, my son had no words. Outside, lightning flashed across the gray sky, illuminating the rain-slicked glass like cracked silver. Inside, everything in my world had changed, and I could feel it settling into place, heavy, incomprehensible, irreversible. Mara held the letter in both hands, the paper trembling slightly in the draft from the window. The ink was dark blue, Lila's favorite color, and the handwriting neat enough to belong to the woman who never allowed a single detail to fall out of place. She began reading again, her voice steady but softer, almost reverent. My dearest Calvin, the letter said, if you're hearing this, I can only imagine how confused you must be. You probably think I've made another mistake, that this is just one more reckless decision you'll have to clean up after. But this is the first thing I've done in years that truly feels right. You spent 22 years beside me, building a life that I eventually convinced myself was too small. I thought success could fill the spaces where patience used to live. But what I built became a wall. And on the other side of it was silence, the silence you never deserved. I blamed you for slowing me down, when in truth you were the only person who ever kept me grounded. You worked with your hands while I worked with my image. You built power lines that brought light into people's homes, while I built networks that only brought light to mine. I used to resent you for being content, for not chasing the world the way I did. But as I grew older, I realized that peace is rarer than ambition. You had it, and I let it slip away. Mara paused, her eyes glistening briefly, before she continued. Brandon, if you're listening, and I hope you are, I know you're angry. You've always been like me that way. You carry your temper like a weapon and your pride like a crown. I raised you to win because I thought winning was the only way to survive. But I was wrong. When you were 15, I missed your concert because of a client dinner. I told myself it was a sacrifice for your future. But the look on your face when I came home that night was the same one your father wore the day I asked for a divorce. I ignored it both times. That's my greatest regret. You became exactly what I trained you to be: efficient, unbreakable, successful. But you never learned how to be kind when no one is watching. That's why I made this choice. Because love without humility rots into entitlement. And I could not leave you that disease as my final gift. Brandon's hands were trembling. His jaw worked soundlessly as he tried to interrupt, but Mara kept reading, the cadence of Lila's words cutting through his resistance like tide through sand. To my son, you will see this as betrayal. I know you will. You'll think I favored your father, but this isn't about favoritism, it's about balance. Your father earned nothing through charm or inheritance. He earned everything by showing up, even when it wasn't convenient. I built an empire that forgot how to care. He built a quiet life that remembered how to forgive. Between us, only one of those things deserves to last. The room felt smaller with every word. Outside, the rain had softened to a steady drizzle, as if even the sky were listening. Mara cleared her throat softly. "There's more," she said, flipping to the next page. "Calvin," Lila's voice continued, "you probably noticed the conditions in Brandon's inheritance. I needed him to have something, but not everything. He still has the home, the money, and his title, but he'll need to hold them with care, not entitlement. You, on the other hand, have the responsibility that used to belong to me. When I began to suspect the integrity of my own company, I realized that power attracts vultures. Devlin Rowe, my CFO, has been slowly consolidating influence over the board. He and 2 others drafted a fake resolution months ago that would have transferred my controlling shares into a management trust. They didn't realize I found out. I let them think I was blind. And instead, I rewrote my will and placed protections where they couldn't reach them. If they move against you, the Goodhart Trust will activate. Emery Pike knows its structure, and Mara Kincaid will have full legal authority to enforce it. I made sure of that. You will also find files under my name in a safety deposit box at Harbor Springs Bank. They contain evidence of every unauthorized transaction made under Devlin's oversight. You'll know what to do." Mara stopped. The weight of those last lines settled on us like dust. Brandon's face had gone pale. "She's lying," he whispered. "Devlin's loyal. He's been with the company since before I—" Mara interrupted gently. "Your mother wasn't prone to falsehood, Mr. Hart. And these instructions are accompanied by notarized documents I already hold in trust." Brandon slumped back into his chair, staring at nothing. Mara turned to the final page. Her tone softened. "The rest is personal." She read slowly now, every word hanging heavy between us. "Calvin, I have one final request. Don't turn this fortune into punishment. I know you're capable of kindness even toward those who've hurt you. It's why I trust you with this legacy. Use what I've built to restore what I broke. Sell the company if you must, but sell it to someone who values its people. If Brandon can learn to see beyond himself, give him a place in it not because he's my son, but because he's yours too. When we were young, I once asked you why you loved storms so much. You said because they reminded you that even destruction can bring renewal. I never understood that until now. You were the calm after every storm, Calvin. I only hope that in the end, I've finally learned how to be still." By the time Mara finished, I was no longer aware of the rain, the office, or even my own heartbeat. I felt the years fold in on themselves, all the arguments, the cold dinners, the silence that stretched between us. And in that silence, I heard her again, the woman in the red scarf, at Rourke's diner, laughing at a stranger's boldness. Brandon wiped at his face roughly, angry at his own tears. "This isn't fair," he muttered. "She gave everything to him just to prove a point." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the arrogant executive, but the boy who used to sit in the passenger seat of my old pickup, asking if we could stop for ice cream on the way home. "She didn't do this to you," I said quietly. "She did it for you." "For me?" He laughed bitterly. "By humiliating me in her will?" "No," I said. "By showing you what humility looks like." For a second, he met my eyes, and for that brief moment, he looked lost. Mara closed the folder carefully, sliding the letter back into its envelope. "There will be further instructions regarding the transition of ownership," she said, her professionalism returning like armor. "But Mrs. Carver's intentions are clear." Brandon didn't respond. He just stood, his shoulders shaking once before he steadied himself. "You'll regret this," he said softly, almost to himself. "Both of you." Then he walked out into the rain without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, and the sound echoed longer than it should have. I sat there, staring at the empty chair across from me, the letter still lying on the desk between us. Lila's words pulsed through me like a second heartbeat. After 15 years of silence, she had finally spoken, and somehow, even from beyond the grave, she had found a way to make me listen. The next morning, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, shareholders, and old acquaintances all wanted comments about the unbelievable transfer of White Pine's control. Somehow the news had leaked before the legal filings were even completed. My answering machine blinked red with 27 new messages. By the time I got to the office, a dozen employees were waiting outside the glass doors. Their expressions were anxious, whispering in clusters as I stepped inside. I could feel their unease. The working-class man who used to fix power lines had suddenly become their new chairman. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or run. Inside, Mara Kincaid was already waiting. Her usually calm face carried a shadow of concern. "Calvin," she said, closing the door behind us. "Brandon's not taking this quietly. He's already met with 2 board members last night." "Devlin Rowe?" I asked. She nodded. "And a private equity attorney from Chicago. He's talking about contesting the will and calling for an emergency vote to remove you before the transition even finalizes." I sighed, sinking into the leather chair behind Lila's old desk. Her nameplate was still there, Lila Carver, CEO. The office smelled faintly of her perfume, cedar, and white tea. "If she were here," I said softly, "she'd probably enjoy watching this." Mara's mouth curved faintly. She did plan for it, in her way. Before I could ask what she meant, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo grainy, taken at night. Brandon standing with Devlin in the parking lot of the Harbor Springs Marina. The caption beneath read, "It's already happening. Check the date on the memo. EP. Emery Pike," I murmured. Mara leaned over to look. "Where did you get that?" "Same man who warned me before the reading. He said there was a forged resolution. Maybe this is what Lila meant in her letter." Mara straightened, her expression sharpening. "If that's true, we need to act immediately. There's a board meeting in 2 hours. You can't walk in there blind." "I don't intend to." 2 hours later, the conference room on the top floor buzzed with low tension. 10 board members sat around the oval table, their eyes moving from me to the documents in front of them. Brandon sat near the head of the table beside Devlin Rowe, his suit immaculate, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Hart," Devlin began smoothly, his tone dripping with practiced charm, "we appreciate your time today. We just want to clarify a few procedural matters regarding the company's future leadership." "Procedural," I echoed. "Funny word, considering my late ex-wife left explicit directions." Devlin smiled. "Of course. But given the unusual nature of her decisions, some of our shareholders are concerned about stability. We think it's best if the board votes to appoint Brandon as interim CEO until legal matters are resolved." Brandon kept his gaze on the papers, pretending to read, but I saw the faint tremor in his hand. Mara stood beside me. "That would directly violate the probate freeze currently in place. Any action to transfer or suspend ownership would be unlawful." Devlin's smile didn't fade. "We're not transferring ownership, merely ensuring continuity. Surely even you, Mr. Hart, wouldn't want your late wife's company paralyzed by, how should I put this, an inexperienced hand." I met his gaze evenly. "You're right. I don't want paralysis. I want truth." From my folder, I pulled out the printed photo Emery had sent and slid it across the table. "This was taken 48 hours before Lila's death. It shows you and Brandon meeting privately after business hours. Would you care to explain why that meeting isn't in the company calendar?" Devlin's confidence flickered for the first time. "I don't see how." I cut him off. "Because if you can't explain it, perhaps I should let Miss Kincaid read what's attached to that image." Mara unfolded a second document, a dated internal memo proposing the reallocation of voting shares to a management trust. The signature line bore Lila's forged name. The room went dead quiet. Devlin's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous. You can't prove." Mara's voice was calm and cold. "We already have. The metadata shows it was drafted from your company laptop, time-stamped 3 days before Lila's death." Several board members exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, an older man named Carlyle, cleared his throat. Devlin, is this true? Devlin's face flushed. This is absurd. That file could have been planted. Brandon shot to his feet. Stop lying. Everyone turned. Brandon's voice cracked like a whip. I saw the memo. You said it was just a draft. That she'd never know. Devlin's composure shattered. You weren't supposed to. Enough, I said quietly. The word carried weight. Lila knew. She found out everything before she died. That's why she left the company to me. She didn't trust you. She barely trusted herself. For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain had returned, striking the tall windows in relentless rhythm. Finally, Carlyle pushed his chair back. I move that we suspend Mr. Rowe pending investigation. The motion passed unanimously. Devlin stood there, stunned, as two security officers escorted him out. The door closed behind them with a heavy click. Brandon remained standing, shoulders hunched, eyes glassy. I didn't know he forged anything, he said quietly. I thought it was legal maneuvering. He said it was just about simplifying structure. Mara folded her arms. You were nearly complicit in fraud, Brandon. If you'd signed, you'd have lost everything and your mother's trust along with it. He sank into his chair, head in his hands. What do I do now? Listen, I said. Start there. Mara nodded at me, then addressed the board. There's one more document, Mrs. Carver asked, to be enacted upon confirmation of corporate stability. It's a letter of intent, a preliminary agreement to convert White Pine into a majority employee-owned corporation within 12 months. The words stunned even me. Employee-owned? I repeated. Mara nodded. Lila drafted it herself. She said wealth should circulate, not stagnate. A murmur rippled through the room. Carlyle smiled faintly. That sounds like her, actually. Brilliant. And impossible. Brandon looked up slowly. You'd give the company away? No, I said. I'd let it belong to the people who actually built it. He stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. The fight drained from his face, replaced by something fragile. She really loved you, he said quietly. Even after everything. She loved you too, I said. She just didn't know how to show it anymore. He nodded once, his eyes wet. Then maybe I can learn. When the meeting adjourned, he stayed behind. If you go through with this sale, he said, let me help. No title, no office. Just let me do the work. I hesitated. You'll have to answer to the new board, not me. That's fair. Outside, the storm had passed. The late afternoon light filtered through the clouds, turning the wet pavement to silver. As we walked toward the elevators, Mara handed me a small key sealed in an envelope. She left one more thing for you, she said. Safety deposit box. Harbor Springs Bank. I turned the key in my fingers, its brass surface catching the light. What's inside? She smiled faintly. Her way of saying goodbye, I think. As the doors closed, I glanced at my reflection in the mirrored walls. The man who once felt small in a house full of ambition, now standing where he never thought he'd belong. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like stewardship. And for the first time in 15 years, that felt like enough. 1 year later, the wind off Lake Michigan carried the smell of pine and rain. The world had changed, in ways both subtle and profound. White Pine Advisory was no longer a monument to one woman's ambition. It was a living, breathing community, owned by the people who kept it alive. The old glass tower downtown now bore a new sign, White Pine Cooperative. Inside, laughter replaced tension. Employees had a stake in their success, and every decision carried a sense of shared purpose. I still served as chair, though I preferred to sit in the background during meetings, letting younger voices carry the floor. That summer afternoon, I sat at the wooden dock outside the company's lakeside retreat in Good Heart, the same property Lila had hidden within her trust. The water glimmered gold beneath the sinking sun. Nearby, Brandon stood with a clipboard, watching a group of interns test solar-powered sensors along the shoreline. His sleeves were rolled up, his posture calm, his expression earnest. He'd changed. The arrogance had burned off like fog under morning light. Now he worked quietly, showing up early, staying late, mentoring others without being asked. He still carried the company's DNA, but it pulsed with something Lila had never learned to nurture: humility. When he noticed me watching, he smiled faintly and lifted a hand in greeting. I waved back. Mara arrived a few minutes later, bringing coffee and a small cedar box. From her safety deposit, she said, "I figured today was the right time." I opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph, the three of us on our porch in 1998. Lila's hair caught by the wind, Brandon's small hand gripping mine. Behind us, the lake glittered, just like it did now. Beneath the photo, in her looping handwriting, were 6 simple words. "You were my calm, always." I closed the lid and exhaled. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky burned amber and violet. The surface of the lake mirrored it perfectly, storm and stillness existing side by side. And I finally understood. Wealth isn't what you pass on. It's what remains when pride dissolves, the quiet grace of forgiveness, the courage to rebuild, and the peace of knowing that love, when finally learned, can outlast every storm.